Joining me now is Christine Ann. She is the founder and executive director of Women Cross DMZ. That's a very specific title. Christine, welcome to the program. How you doing?
Hi, Cenk. Thanks for having me.
No problem. So first obvious question is, what is Women Cross DMZ?
We are a global movement of women. We're mobilizing to end the Korean War with a Korea Peace Agreement. In 2015, we organized a historic crossing of the DMZ, that's the demilitarized zone, falsely named the demilitarized zone because it's one of the most militarized places in the world. But we did it with 30 women peacemakers, including Gloria Steinem, whose home I'm Skyping in from today, and 2 Nobel Peace Laureates, Mairead Maguire from Northern Ireland, Laima Gabowi from Liberia, 2 women who succeeded in organizing women to bring peace to their countries. And we marched with 10,000 Korean women on both sides of the DMZ. And so we crossed, calling to end the Korean War with the peace treaty and to reunite families that have been separated for 3 generations because of the war, and to call for women's leadership in the peace process. I'm going to take my glasses off just so there's not so much glare.
That's okay. No problem. So look, there's more I want to talk about in what you guys did in walking, but right now there's pressing issues about what we should do with North Korea. And so Donald Trump says, hey, we should go meet with him and try to get to a peace deal. A lot of Democrats say, no, that legitimizes Kim Jong-un and you should not do that. What's your take on who's right on that particular issue?
Well, it's hard for me to say this, especially in the home of Gloria Steinem, but we are in agreement that it's really important to meet with your enemy. You don't make peace with your friends, you make peace with your enemies. And most Americans have no idea that we have been in a perpetual state of war with North Korea. It is America's oldest war. And from 1950 to 53, 80% of North Korean cities were completely flattened by US bombing campaigns that, completely leveled entire cities. And when I've traveled through North Korea, oftentimes they would point to this one kind of building and, they would keep pointing to that building. And I would say, what was the significance of that? And they would say, that's the only remaining building from the Korean War. I mean, that's 1 in 4 family members were killed. And so it's really important to bring that history, but also an important historical fact that is not included is that when the military commanders from the US and North Korea sat down to negotiate an armistice, they promised within 90 days to return to negotiate a political settlement to the war. And, when I was in Hanoi a few weeks ago, we thought that was going to be done. We thought that Trump and Kim were going to declare an end to the Korean War. It's what the special representative, Stephen Biegun, had indicated in a kind of significant speech he gave at Stanford a few weeks before Hanoi. We thought there were going to be partial lifting of sanctions. We thought they were going to open up liaison offices. And sadly, it seemed that that whole process was derailed, probably because of what was happening in Washington, D.C. that day, which was the Michael Cohen hearings, which the Democrats brought that day, but also the presence of, Bauman Bolton, the national security advisor, who was actually the one that destroyed the 1994 agreed framework that the Clinton administration negotiated with North Korea that froze its nuclear weapons program.
So plenty of agreements. I think the Democratic hawks have not been helpful in this process. But I don't agree that the Michael Cohen hearings had anything to do with what went wrong in Vietnam in terms of the peace talks. I think they couldn't come to an agreement, and of course that's the heart of the matter. But do you think the U.S. could have done anything differently? Should we have? Because it seemed like the North Koreans were saying, no, you have to lift all the sanctions, and it doesn't make sense to do that unless we do it in a graduated way. Now I want to get to peace, but I don't want to give Kim Jong-un everything he wants in return for just empty promises.
Well, the truth is that we're dealing with a nuclear-armed country, North Korea, and as William Perry who's the former Secretary of Defense who negotiated the agreed framework, has famously said, we have to deal with North Korea as they are, not as we wish it to be. And the truth is that they possess nuclear weapons, and they have said they're not going to unilaterally disarm. They're not going to give it up until there is the end of hostile relations with the United States. And so if we look back at the Singapore Agreement between Trump and Kim, the first promise was to transform relations. And sadly, I think we have an expectation that North Korea is just going to take steps to denuclearize. But what have we really done? I think the good news is that tensions have been significantly reduced. We're not at 2017 of fire and fury. We are at a place where the U.S. Forces Commander, General Abrams, said that, scaling back and halting the U.S.-South Korea war drills doesn't impact the readiness of the alliance in defending in the case of a North Korean attack. And so, it's and just to the point about North Korea demanding the complete lifting of sanctions, that was not the case, contrary to what President Trump said in Hanoi. They requested a partial lifting of sanctions, and specifically that evening, it was pretty significant. I mean, this has never been done, but the North Koreans called a press conference, and the foreign minister, Ri Yong-ho, basically disabused President Trump, and he said, we requested the lifting of sanctions that have been harming the people and the civilian economy of North Korea. And so I think when we look from the progressive anti-war peace movement, we have seen the impact of sanctions on people in Cuba. We have seen the sanctions, how it killed up to 500,000 children in Iraq. So I think we have to look at the futility of sanctions and actually forcing North Korea to give up its nuclear weapons, but instead seeing how it's harming the regular people.
But Christine, I have a couple of concerns about that. So the sanctions do seem to be pressuring the government, and it's at least getting them to the table, the North Korean government, and they seem genuinely concerned about it. They do want to trade things forward, including perhaps denuclearizing. So I understand what you're saying about the sanctions, and I have the same concerns. So how do we balance that out? If we just took away the sanctions, I don't think that they'd give us anything in return.
I think it's a step for step. And I think right now we had seen a few weeks ago with the special representative, Stephen Biegun, make a very pragmatic approach and, offer what the South Koreans, who, President Moon has been the key interlocutor in all of this. If it weren't for President Moon, we would not be in this place right now. And obviously, without the Candlelight Revolution and the social movements in South Korea, there would be no President Moon. But what South Korea has been, really calling for is we need a phased approach. We need progress towards normalizing relations with North Korea. And, North Korea in Hanoi, Kim Jong-un had offered the complete dismantlement in the presence of international inspectors, US inspectors of Yongbyon, which is their key plutonium nuclear facility. This is what Sig Hecker, the Stanford nuclear scientist, has said. This is like basically the most significant, the heart of North Korea's nuclear program. And so they are, and I absolutely agree with you that North Korea is willing to commit to denuclearization because, we have seen Kim Jong-un, make clear statements, and we have, in his New Year's Day speech, which many people say signal where he's headed, he did not make a single mention of nuclear weapons or the need to defend the nation. It was all about the economy and about improving the welfare of the people. I think this is where giving peace a chance, trying things like opening up liaison offices in Pyongyang or in Washington so that there can be more communication. I think it's significant that from the Singapore Declaration, there was the repatriation of remains where 55 sets of remains of US soldiers have been recovered. And that really has improved dialogue between the Korean,
Those are all good positive steps, Christine, but let's talk about the end game. So that's another, for me, unsolvable dilemma, which is that in order to get peace, you have to assure the North Korean government that they will be safe and secure. But assuring them of that then continues the imprisonment and brutal treatment of their own citizens. where they have concentration camps, et cetera. So how do we resolve that?
I just spent the last few days with a North Korean defector who joined a South Korean women parliamentarian and civil society delegation to meet with members of Congress to talk about this historic opportunity where 9 out of 10 South Koreans want a decisive end to the Korean War. And she really disabused a lot of the mythology that ending a war, having peace with North Korea would just give greater power. I think what is giving Kim Jong-un the ability to maintain a garrison state is the unresolved state of war. And we have plenty of evidence from even the World Food Program the director, who is an American, Dave Beasley, who says human rights would improve were there to be a peace agreement. We have the special rapporteur on North Korea human rights who says that peace is going to be an important step towards the improvement of human rights. We have the Commission of Inquiry report from the UN who also says this. So I think that that is a terrible trope that is getting in the way of progress towards peace. And
Christine, so we only have about a minute left or less actually. So real quick, even though Donald Trump is oversimplifying it, is Vietnam a little bit of a guide for North Korea that if we began to trade more and more with North Korea, eventually if we have a deal, that they might improve the standard of living, et cetera?
We've already seen, Kim Jong-un make steps towards improving the conditions of the economy. But what's hamstringing? I mean, let's look at the sanctions, the Security Council sanctions that they were requesting. So one is targeting the industry of textiles. Who do you think works in those textile factories? Kim Jong-un or the women workers? And we know that when women have access to the purse, that everybody benefits from it. So I think we have to have a fresh look, a different approach. And the truth is that the people of North and South Korea and their leaders have declared an end to the Korean War. They have made historic steps towards peace. It's time for the United States to get with the reality that's taking place on the Korean Peninsula.
All right, Christine Ann, thank you so much for joining us. Really appreciate it.
Thanks, Cenk.
Wonderful conversation.